welcome to another episode of Drinking on the Edge. I'm your host, David Fuhrer, and of course, my co-producer, Matt Rosenberg. Joining us today from the south of France is Nicole Sierra-Rolet, who is the proprietor or co-proprietor of her farm. It's called La Verrière, and most notably, the reason that we're here today, her wine brand called Chêne Bleu. Welcome, Nicole.
Lovely to be here, David. Thank you for this, and thank you, Matty, for organizing it as well.
It's been great. So before we launch into the wine side of things, can you please share with listeners a little bit about your background, showing us how it is the long path that brought you into wine?
Sure. Actually, my schooling started off right near you. I ended up at Vassar. I had gone to the French lycée in Milan, and that, as you probably know, is a very rigorous and structured kind of education system. And I was thrust into the deep end of the liberal arts school by taking on this really completely opposite way of thinking about things, much more creative, much more free-form, and didn't have any idea at the time how valuable that would end up being when I transitioned into the wine world in mid-career. So my background was originally geopolitics and international affairs. Then one day, more recently, Elizabeth Bradley, the president of Vassar, approached me about a project that was close to her heart, which is still in its development stage, but very exciting. Created an institute specifically dedicated to protecting and chaperoning the future of liberal arts. I think its role in society is becoming increasingly important. A lot of cultures around the world have education systems that don't encourage that kind of free-form creative thinking. And I think it's really, really helpful when everybody's talking about the advent of artificial intelligence, et cetera. The top minds of this world who are the greatest specialists in artificial intelligence will be the first ones to say that liberal arts are the only way we're going to be able to retain our humanity and our society in a form that we're excited about. So it all started off right near you.
So just to be clear, are you referring to the Institute for Liberal Arts at Vassar?
Yeah.
So it's a new initiative being launched through this existing part of the institution?
Yes. And very, very interesting to anybody, especially if you think about the wine world. It's actually a perfect home for polymaths or people with multiple interest abilities, the proverbial jackets of all trades. From the outside, I think a lot of people will think about it either as a very agrarian profession because they are familiar with the vineyard side, or maybe they'll think of it as biotech or biochemistry and science if they are very familiar with winemaking, or they'll think of it as something for hedonists or lifestyle people on the more tasting side of things. And so the fact that it requires all of those skills to come together is something that you tend to only find out once you're actually on the other side of the barrier and trying to make this stuff. And the fact that after Vassar, I ended up in the financial world and in think tanks, I think it's kind of really handy too, because actually because you have so many winemaker friends, that it's a business that works with very slim margins or negative margins. It's a very treacherous business financially. And therefore, having a background with some financial skills, I think, is something I'd recommend to any of my winemaker friends because it is testing of one's abilities.
Agreed. But at Vassar, it's not going to be the program that you're looking to help develop. It's not going to be so much financial based because it is the Institute for Liberal Arts. So what form, what's going to take place at Vassar that you can share with us at this juncture that would perhaps lead the students into some form of work with wine? Where do you see a link there, or is this off the table?
I think so. I think nobody really considers winemaking right after school unless there's been some kind of family link or some kind of farming background. And yet I'm going to be encouraging the school to put it on the table. It is a very small and niche profession, but the exciting thing is it connects business, science, nature, everything. And it is hard to think of another business that requires such a broad reach of skills and interests. And I think that it's the perfect place to park oneself once you have all that intellectual curiosity and know how to put it.
That's great.
Because as you know, and I know, and most of us who work with this world have discovered, it is kaleidoscopically interesting. Every way you turn it, there's a way to connect it to the biggest thoughts, the broadest thinking, the greatest experiences.
Religion, philosophy, anthropology, all these different sciences come into play.
Exactly. There you go.
And liberal arts questions,
you come out of school, you have no, they ask you, at least in my day, they used to ask us how fast you could type and all that stuff. And you get channeled into these professions. I mean, look, I came out in the 80s, right? I had all my big idealistic goals about making the world a better place. And
so then
only people hiring were the banks, and we all kind of piled in there because, they were desperate for anyone who had a good work ethic, good grades, just so.
And I'm sure your parents were happy that you get into finance rather than into alcohol beverages as a start to your career.
Actually, I was lucky that my mother wasn't really like that. One of the people at Vassar was joking that they were majoring in fine arts, but if their parents asked, it was finance.
Very cute. So if you could please, if we could narrow this down, was there a pivot point for you, or was it kind of a gradual taking on of it that you left the finance world behind and you moved into the world of wine? Was there a specific point?
For sure. So here I was, a nice little innocent investment banker, because at that point I worked for David Rockefeller in think tanks, and then as you probably...
And what happened? What was the shining moment for you?
Well, first I met this very charming Frenchman, formidable and formidable Xavier Rolle. He had just come across this abandoned medieval property and its amazing vineyard from the 9th century. And he had just crossed the Rubicon because he was convinced there was a diamond in the rough. It was one of these unicorn vineyards that was going to do all these great things. And he had it for about...
What year?
6 months.
Oh, he had it for 6 months. What year was this?
94.
Thank you.
94.
Okay.
We married in 97, but he was like, "Oh, come to France to see and make the wine at the top of the mountain." Of course, he would be appalled to hear that because he has a fantastic accent in English by French standards. But nobody else back then could see what he saw in it. Not even me, for sure. I didn't have a background in wine, and I was thinking, how is it possible that all these French people can appreciate this vineyard that was on the market for about 20 years? And of course, I've learned since then that he's always 25 years ahead of his time. And I should never take a bet against him on anything like that. But he had recognized that there were these, what we like to joke about, the Fantastic Four, which is the extraordinary, amazing altitude, right? We're between 550 and 600. Well, I would say in feet, that's about 1,800 feet. Mm-hmm. And that is probably the single reason that all of this is justified, because being far south, having all that sun like Chateauneuf, etc., but then the cooler temperatures, etc., they come from the altitude, amazing. Altitude also means typically mountains. Mountains means isolation. We have no neighbors. It's UNESCO biosphere forest around us. So the idyllic isolation plays a very large part in all our sustainability.
And may I ask, where in France is this located?
It's not far from Avignon. It's above Gigondas in the Dalpeb de Montmirail. So anyone who's been to the region, you've probably seen the Mont Ventoux towering over everything here, which is really it plays an essential part.
When you took possession of it, you and Xavier took possession of it in 1997. Were there vines already there in existence, and were they currently in production?
Yeah.
Okay. So it was an active vineyard site.
Yes, it was active on and off since the Middle Ages, but as you probably recall from listening to other winemakers, in the 60s in France, 50s and 60s, there was a huge exodus from these very prized historical vineyards at the top of the mountain with the monks and the whole 9 yards, down to the valley, because you had the advent of chemicals, mechanization, creation of cooperatives, and suddenly there was a huge incentive to bump yields up with a bunch of chemicals. And why would you break your back and do everything by hand?
Right. There was a time. It was a time throughout Europe. It was a question of quantity over quality in general terms.
That's right. And so all of these places were abandoned overnight. And then you could buy them for a song, which was great. But then you'd have to put in a good 10, 15 years restructuring everything, et cetera, which is exactly what we did. Yeah. We were lucky that his sister and her husband joined us, and we went off on this big family adventure. The first few years were horrible. I won't bore anybody with more details, but we were...
by the way, people can go to the Chêne Bleu website and read all about it. Yep, let's begin this, because we have a few wines of Chêne Bleu here that we'll be tasting. Matt and I will be, at least. I don't know if you have any on hand at home, but we have first your Le Rosé 2021. Ah, look at that. There you go, Matt.
You're a brave man to start your day at 8:30 with a glass of
It's spring. It's spring. I already pulled the cork on this, and I love the smell.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, it was great. It's a great smell to wake up to on a spring morning. It's sunny here.
Rosé will do that, right? It will bring back those evocative images of sunshine and springtime. The role of this rosé.
Yep. As we're enjoying it, please talk about the wine. But I also you touched very briefly upon Chêne Bleu being a family endeavor, in as much as your sister-in-law and her husband have been part of this, I believe, since its inception, or at least nearly. That's clear on your website too. But if you can talk about how this developed as a family enterprise, not just as a couple, and maybe their offspring of their enterprise, but you have the extended family involved as well on one property. Not that you grew up into it, as many generations of vintners have done throughout the world, or at least throughout Europe. You created this. It was born anew with you, your husband Xavier, and your sister-in-law and brother-in-law coming on board and doing this together. Speak about the rosé in light of this. How's it going?
Yeah, it was a lot of family debate about whether we should even be making rosé, because in those days you didn't have these designer rosés already established as a category in the market and with followers, and it was mainly known as something that made these cheap and cheery, insipid wines, and that's exactly the polar opposite of the kind of wine I like to drink. It's all about ageability and complexity and nuance and right? So thank you. So that is, we were like, why would we bother making rosé? And it was interesting that just a few people here and there, we hadn't yet connected the dots with them, that were already launching on this venture separately to try to take rosé very seriously on every aspect of production, and really show the world that rosé can do some very exciting stuff. And what I mean by that is that, I
just want to quickly add in. There's many different types of rosés, and the explosion of rosé as a credible, wine has risen, as we know, in the last several years. Not just here in the U.S. from where I'm speaking to, but also in different points in Europe from where you're speaking to us from. Your rosé is of a particular type. There are many styles of rosé. And as you were talking, I just kind of motioned to Matt and give him like a thumbs up. This is a damn good rosé. So this is a serious wine, not a serious rosé. It's a serious wine, flat out.
Oh yes, the beautiful first impression, all those lovely, like the Provençal football, all those kind of cheerful, seductive notes that you get right away when you stick your nose in the glass. But then, where does rosé typically fall short, right? It's like a little soap bubble. Oh, that's so pretty. Poof, it's gone, right? Yep. It flat wines, and there's no mid-palate, etc. How do you put that stuff back in? Well, it's a real combination of technique and vineyard work and all sorts of expensive things. No chemicals in the vineyard. No chemicals in the winery. You know what that's like? rosé has become like Photoshop for wine, right? People have all these little magic powders, up the tannins, strip the tannins, up the acidity, strip the acidity, change the color. People make comments about the color of your rosé, and I'm laughing because rosé color is totally up for sale. It's like paint colors on your wall. They come with these little nuanced, little you've just picked like. It's crazy, right?
Yeah, Nicole, this is going out to the world. Most wine consumers are unaware of these things, that there are over 200 additives that are allowed under U.S. federal law into wine that is made here in the U.S.
Jesus.
Well, yeah.
Already, So
before we
got to dial all that back, go back to the fruit, go back to the vineyard, and rebuild this step by step. And by the time you put it on, we put 20% on oak for 30% on oak for 2 months.
Mm-hmm.
We don't use any tartaric acid, so that's why it doesn't fall apart after a year. We do verticals, the rosés back in 2006. We fine it with ground organic green pea powder instead of PDPP, which is the petrochemical, form of microplastic that everybody uses. And then it's like, surprise, surprise, it's come out #1 in the world 3 times. Well, that's not, you don't just improvise that. And it's the sum of lots of parts. And I'm so excited that more and more winemakers are really
taking rosé seriously.
Their heads on how to make really make the good stuff. Well, and when the rosé bubble bursts, and some people have suggested that sooner rather than later, we're quite convinced that there will always be a subset of serious rosé that will be able to hold their own in the wine world, even when the fad is finished.
Before I forget, and you didn't make a mention of this, your viticultural practices, your vinification practices, you are always been organic, and you have also embraced biodynamic as well. Is that correct?
Sustainable, bee friendly, regenerative. My husband is really to be credited for all that, because he understood nature, biodiversity, the value of that, the importance of it way back before all these things were hashtags. And he's a very passionate conservationist. He goes up in the morning and there's the bird calls and all that stuff. I was from downtown Manhattan, right? I grew up next to Central Park. All I knew about biodiversity was cockroaches, squirrels, a couple
species of rats. Yeah.
Exactly. And so for me, it was very foreign. And the irony is not just how I've embraced the whole winemaking world, but also how I became completely passionate about protecting the environment and working with bees and all sorts of things to try to find more ways to use natural allies to make better wine. And, sometimes that goes really against a lot of winemaking traditions, a lot of the stuff they teach you in school, even at the best schools. So I was able to go to UC Davis. I know a lot of people have gone to the top schools, come out into the world with still what is to me very out of date reference points in terms of how you can actually solve for all this stuff just using nature.
Yeah. And so the Le Rosé was our first step. You have a second rosé, I know, that's also out in the market. This particular rosé, what grapes is it comprised of? The Le Rosé 2021?
So, yeah, I'm glad you asked, because this is a constant shifting goalpost with every vintage and all our research that we do on rosé. We really are kind of a wine lab for many things here, but rosé is one of them. And we typically have the really nice, big, chunky Grenache backbone. So that's a lot of, usually 60%. Nothing original in using Grenache as the backbone for your rosé. I think it lends itself beautifully to that. Then always a bit of the Syrah. Whenever we can have the structure that comes from the Syrah, usually 20-25%. On this particular vintage, it's 20%. Then I'm so excited that we were able to get some Mourvèdre. Everybody told us not to plant that it's late ripening, so at altitude that can be a problem. And usually about 5%. This vintage is quite particular. It's the 14% Mourvèdre, which is lovely. They're coming into their own. They bring lots of lovely spicy notes. I really liked how they've been helping our rosé blend. But unusually, no Sarceau. We had a lot of problems with our white grapes in 2021. not just the weather conditions, but also the wild boars that made some incursions. We usually keep them out of the vineyard because we have a wild boar spa for them with lots of lovely water and mud and shade, and that protects the front part of the vineyard. But on the back there, they made some incursions. No Safso, and finally Rolle, which, as you probably know, is
Vermentino
for
Yeah.
Vermentino, exactly. And that is fabulous. But people who don't want to use tartaric acid,
it's got plenty of it.
Vermentino really allows you to regulate the acidity on a hot year, and it's about 6%, or averaging about 5%. It's gone up to 12 on really hot years.
Now, thank you for
that's the specificity of the 21.
Thanks for detailing what the grape varieties used in the rosé. Now, going on to blends. Now, to let people know, you do make single variety wines, not too many of them, but a small handful that are, I believe, also available here in the U.S., not just there. But let's continue on. We do have limited time, but continue on with your blends. I came to know your wines several years ago through these twin red blends. And you have, through your importer, Wilson Daniels, graced us with examples from the 2014 vintage of your Abelard and Eloise red blend.
Absolutely. The twin set. They are the yin and yang twin set because they come with the purpose of trying to showcase the two contradictory faces of our vineyard. So the very sunny aspect that gives us that lovely Grenache that you associate with the Southern Rhone, right? You always hear Grenache, king of the Southern Rhone, Syrah, queen of the Northern Rhone. And our Grenache is very meaty, very muscular, and we thought it really deserved to be showcased because at altitude it has this particularity that it gets very concentrated by the wind and not the sun, right? So what that means is we have 21 different winds at altitude, right? The famous winds of Provence, the Mistral, but also a bunch of other ones. And they dry out our berries. They leave these small berries with sticky juice and thick skins packed with phenolics. Thank you for making enthusiastic things. That makes me very happy.
For those of you if you're listening, you can't see my face. You can only hear Nicole's lovely voice. I'm making these amazing looks just from smelling. I have not tasted the wine yet. The aromas are entrancing, and they're shifting just as the winds that Nicole was describing are shifting.
Oh, wow. We're poets as well as a presenter.
The wine's inspiring me. Come on.
Merci beaucoup. Not bad for this early in the day. And I also thought it was so important to showcase the opposite side, which is the very Northern Rhone style Syrah that we have, right? Everyone associates those cooler climate Syrahs with less fruit, more complexity, more intrigue, lots of nice savory notes, some nice herbaceous notes, and they're not the big fruit bombs that you'll get in a hotter climate. So I think that's why they're so famous around the world, so expensive, etc. And the fact that this altitude gives us the very Northern Rhone restraint and finesse to the Syrah, I thought was worth really highlighting in a blend that shows you this very perfumey but more restrained Syrah that you would normally not.
Well, it's definitely there's so much happening.
Rhone.
There's so much happening here in the glass, Nicole. The wine is already opened. It's provided more aromas than were just coming to my nose in the first minute or two. It's transforming amazingly, and I still have not yet tasted. Matt's beat me to the taste. So let me throw you a curveball here. Now, you were mentioning Syrah on a couple of points, and that's great. So, in as much as Syrah has kind of planted its flag, shall we say, in parts of California, I noticed that on your website, there's a connection between Chêne Bleu and the Santa Barbara area of California, which has a fair amount of Syrah and a fair amount of very good Syrah. But there's a couple of players there that have helped you or influenced you subtly there at Chêne Bleu. Why the Santa Barbara connection?
Thank you for talking about those guys. I love them. And they were there for me when I needed them and other people weren't, and they never forgot that kind of stuff. So it started because my mother, who had been a food critic and a very worldly and knowledgeable person, she retired there. And by the time she got to Santa Barbara, she was, a fat little old lady. And so she was often not taken seriously by the wine set because they just thought she wouldn't know the difference between the good stuff and the rest of the stuff. And so little did they know since they had to reckon with. So she snooped around all the vineyards, a bit like Tootsie, incognito, and sniffed out all the best wines and all the best people. And when I went to visit her there, he took me around and I got to meet some of the best right away. And to my amazement, a handful of them, well, in particular, Andrew Murray and Doug Marjoram, big shout out to them. They were so kind and gracious. And unlike all those other people that when we started out were like, yeah, whatever, call me when you're famous. And another aspiring winemaker who thinks they're going to be able to make something special. Yeah, yawn, right?
Uh-huh.
These guys were like, listen, how can I help you? What can? And I was like, help, come help us with harvest. Tell us who prints your labels, blah, blah, blah. And
very
they
helpful.
could not have been more kind and more gracious. So it's all about giving back. And I'd like to think that I've looked for many opportunities to look out for them after that, because you don't forget stuff like that. But I've kept up my whole relationship with the Rhone out there, because obviously Hospice du Rhone is a huge and very influential fine event, absolutely. And through that, I've also gotten to know a bunch of very passionate California winemakers. I do feel that the connection goes a bit beyond that, though.
Well, before you continue, I just want to draw
the project. Yeah,
yeah. I just want to make a quick point that your mother was left unspoken. There's another family connection is how Chêne Bleu grew. It's not just your father's family. Your mother played an ancillary role in its development. Look at that.
And the kids who have all expressed in different ways a lot of interest in the project, and Xavier's daughter, who studied winemaking and come and worked at the vineyard a lot, and all sorts of good prospects for the next generation.
So there's a potential legacy line being drawn here. Okay.
We're very much hoping that.
Okay. So in tasting the Abelard before we taste the Eloise, why this particular literary connection, this romantic 12th century? I made my centuries wrong.
Yes, very good. You're up on your medieval philosophy and theology. Also very impressive for 8:30 in the morning.
I've been called a throwback in many ways and many times.
Good. We like. And the concept of illustrating these yin and yang was to say, I don't like to dwell on gender stereotypes for this day and age where that can get you into lots of trouble.
Indeed.
But there was a kind of a more, let's say, delicate and therefore in the traditional iconography, feminine restraint to Eloise, and then this more opulent, expressive, concentrated style of Abelard. And the idea was the medieval lovers were like the Romeo and Juliet of France, the most famous French lover. Extraordinary story. If you don't know about it, definitely look it up on our website or elsewhere. Nobody in America seems to know them except some academics, etc. Although Cole Porter wrote about them, all sorts of references to literature and history. Being John Malkovich, very funny reference to them at the beginning of that.
Uh-huh.
But as a rule of thumb, nobody's going to know about them until they come out with the Netflix series. But it's really worthy of a Netflix series.
Yeah. And speaking of which,
they're so modern in their thinking, and they were one of these big sort of power couples, that inspired so many others, like Antony and Cleopatra, and so many power couples who came after them.
And Shakespeare probably modeled some of Romeo and Juliet after that. It preceded them by a couple of few centuries.
They were very inspirational people.
You may have heard in the background the sound of another bottle opening, and I poured that Eloise for both Matt and myself. So let's jump into a little bit of background. The Eloise, I presume that with the Abelard being more Syrah focused, the Eloise is more...
No, normally, sorry, because I kind of bounced all over the place. I do apologize.
As do I.
what I would normally do is show them side by side. Like if you're having
Which
a
we are
dinner
doing
party
today.
or whatever, it's really fun to have small pours of each. Like instead of buying 2 bottles of the same wine, you show them, because you'll always have people have a preference for one or the other, but it'll always be mixed, and you not predictable of who's going to like which better.
Or one person could even change their opinion from one day to the next. I've seen it happen countless times.
There you go. So with my bouncing around, I think I would normally start with Eloise, just because she's the majority Syrah. She's the one that has the greater restraint. And there's a secret ingredient in there, which we originally plagiarized shamelessly from the Northern Rhone. Because we had that Northern Rhone style Syrah, we decided to put in a little bit of white wine, which at the time was Viognier. Now, why would the Northern Rhoners bother with the Viognier? And it is quite idiosyncratic to put white wine in which you're red. And the theory is that although that Syrah is so elegant or refined, you do need a bit of Grenache if you can to bulk her up. That's certainly what we do. And then that Viognier brings some beautiful perfumey notes that kind of pull you into the glass and give her the little sex appeal that she doesn't always have with the more austere style. And so we did that until 2011. And then we switched over. We were mucking around and blending around. And we came across this idea of trying the Roussan. Now, our Roussan, which we have as a base of a different wine that's been one of our trademark wines, is beautiful at altitude. And our Roussan ages very well. And these are wines that are made to age. Like 2007 and 14 is our current release, which is kind of crazy, especially if you're a banker. Much better for clients than for them. And
not a cash flow wine.
Switching to the Roussan really gave it that, the body, the smoother tannins, and the kind of more voluptuous style, shall we say. And we really wanted to underscore the difference between the two. And the Abelard, which was the first one we were trying, that one really keeping it as a very serious 85% Grenache with a lot of tannic structure and a lot of concentration from the smaller berries. I think a lot of it, these are obviously food wines, right? Nobody sits around drinking super concentrated wines without food, or at least those of us who grew up in Italy, as I did.
Ideally.
We would never consider doing that.
No. Ideally, all wines should be food wines. And one thing, on your labels, you have the motto in Latin, but the English translation being "Not mine, not yours, but ours." It's a lovely motto. Was it purely original, or was it lifted?
This ties in with a whole world view that we have. I mean, this is a motto that I had well before winemaking, which it really dawned on me when I worked in the think tank world, and I saw the value of having the right people and the right ideas coming together, and that whole 1 + 1 = 3, which of course winemakers love in fermentation, because you create this third substance that's so much greater than the sum of the parts. And you can do that with people and ideas as well. So right from the get-go, we were very collaborative, open, delighted to work with other winemakers, delighted to work with and listen to all the stakeholders around this project. And it's a bit that metaphor that you see in the Amish with the, everyone pulling in the same direction to lift the barn. You can do so much more when you're all in communication and all that. So that is very, very much part of my whole belief system. And that's why from the get-go, I put that on our label, the "Not mine, not yours, but ours." I think what happened is that mushroomed into other initiatives, right? You've seen how we did this International Grenache Day, the Areni Global Institute for the Future of Fine Wine.
You don't rest easy just because you're making good wines and they're selling well. You long ago helped to institute the International Grenache Day. The Areni Global, which is a very wine business-oriented thing, not something that, unless you're shall we say, over-the-top wine aficionado, would you necessarily want to involve yourself with. It's a wine business thing of a very high level. And then your homegrown sustainability initiative that you proudly post on the website.
the whole idea that you can try to capture all the biodiversity around you and stick it into your bottle, it's so much easier said than done. And a big ally are bees, because they're one of the only things that you can actually bring in and control in terms of quickly increasing the quantities of them, especially honeybees. Of course, many people have wild bees. But my husband was a beekeeper from his teenage years, and
that will keep you humble.
You get really excited at the idea that the bees can't just increase the yield, but and carry indigenous yeast and all that good stuff. They can also affect the wine through the soil, because they spread the cover crops. Those in turn host the microorganisms that are the good ones, but bad ones, and those feed the plants. And by breaking down all those nutrients, we all know all that, and that's true for all of agriculture. But the big specificity for fine wine, and the stuff that really captured our imagination, is that what happens in the process of the microorganisms transmitting soils is, of course, the famous sense of place that we now have all found out is having to come through those microorganisms. The minute you use a bunch of chemicals, you sever the relationship with the soil, then you have to put a bunch of fertilizers to feed your plants, and that's it. You might make something that tastes good, but it's not going to have the ability to connect in with where it's from. And so these bees can be fantastic allies in that, because of course, when you make wine that has a sense of place, it opens the door to quote unquote wines worth talking about, which is Hugh Johnson's definition of fine wine, which brings about critics and people who care about the good stuff. And then it opens the door to financial sustainability, because you can actually have people value and understand your work in ways that you wouldn't necessarily. So I think it's a win-win-win-win solution for the planet, the bees, and the winemakers. And I'm very excited about collaborating with any other winemakers around the world who share our views. So it's a very open source project, and they should just reach out to me if they have projects of their own.
That's wonderful.
That could be related to that.
Yep.
Or even if they just want to convert, I think right now what the world needs, what the wine world needs, is much, much more access to sustainable and regenerative viticulture. I think there are people who have figured out how to do it, and that's all hunky-dory. There are people who will never be interested because that's just who they are. But then you have this big mass of people who say things like, I would if I could, but I'm afraid of how to go about it, and the risks, and and if you could guarantee to me that you could give me a roadmap and make sure I wouldn't lose all my costs in the conversion process, then sign me up tomorrow.
I would venture. I would venture these days. There's a lot of open source information available to be found. Some of which are linked on the Chêne Bleu website, CHENEBLEU.com. For those of you that want to be drawn into it. Nicole, before we finish today, a couple of things. One, I want to comment about the difference of these two wines is dramatic, even though the Abbayard and Eloise are of the same vintage, made by all the same people in the same circumstances. They are very different wines, dramatically so. Tasting the Eloise, it is at the moment, upon opening, a more restrained wine, whereas the Abbayard is more expressive. Again, this is within minutes after opening. I'm sure that the wines will go through transformations worth watching over the next few days, should they last that long. They're absolutely delicious, and I recommend people to seek those out, no matter where they're located. And of course, the Rosé, which was just absolutely just great way to start any Saturday morning as well. Thanks to you, and of course your importer Wilson Daniels, for making these available to us. And before we sign off, what sort of things should we be looking from you and Chêne Bleu in the future, aside from your ongoing work with Vassar that you talked about rather carefully? And what's happening with Chêne Bleu? Can we find you back in the United States anytime soon? I know you just finished a long tour here. What's going on? What can we look forward to?
You betcha. We have a bunch of fun things coming on. We have in Manhattan a great cruise around the harbor with the famous Arabella, which is beautiful scooter and lots of exciting stuff coming up in June. The Fine Minds for Fine Wines taking place in the Napa-Sonoma area, which is the think tank that led to the creation of the Areni Global Institute for the Future of Fine Wine. Anyone who wants to join a community of people who care about that future, wine lovers, anybody who wants to have their say and see where we can all shepherd this fabulous profession that's the second oldest profession in the world and needs to remain relevant and stay part of our cultural lives and part of our joy of living, should definitely look into joining that community. And to answer your question, watch me now be completely devoted to these regenerative causes as possible, because it's now or never for all of us. And I had a fabulous dinner with Alice Waters, who's doing exciting stuff on regenerative food, and I'm on the board of the Yale Sustainable Food Program. And I think anybody who cares about what they eat should also be caring about what they drink and how it's made. So I'm hoping that we'll be banging on lots of pots and pans in that area as well, because none of us can do everything. Everybody can do something, and we want all hands on deck to try to save our planet from its sad fate.
Well, like you said, not mine, not yours, but ours is the motto. Chêne Bleu, Nicole Sierra-Rolet, thank you for joining Drinking on the Edge. It's been a pleasure, as always, spending time with you.
Thank you, David, and thank you for making the time to give a voice to people who are doing work sometimes on a small scale, but with the vision and passion, hopefully, to all come together and move the dial. Really, hats off to you.
That's been terrific.